Well, hello folks, and welcome to episode 171 of Retro Power Uncut on a very chilly day. It was about -7 degrees C this morning, and yeah, not a particularly warm run into work. Lots of ice everywhere. So anyway, here we are in the fabrication workshop as usual for a start, and we're going to start with the Jensen and a little introduction. I think last week I mentioned that we've got a chap called Matt in doing a trial for us, and Matt is now an employee and he's carrying on with where he started last week, carrying on with the Jensen. He's worked at another local company for many years, for 22 years. He'd worked for a company called Leaping Cats, which is very nearby. They're based in Nuneaton. He'd been there for 22 years, basically since he left school. And they've just recently closed the doors, very sadly, because they're a very reputable, very long-standing company. They're the sort of UK's leading, I think, people really in the XK120 and XK140 Jaguar world. And yeah, Matt's been a fabricator there for a long time. And yeah, it's a shame that the business has gone. I believe it was a family sort of thing where the newer, younger parts of the family that were taking over didn't wish to continue the business. I believe, I may be wrong on that, but that's my understanding anyway. So Matt was looking for a job, and we, as you'll know, just on the run up to Christmas, had Scott leave for pastures new. So the timing actually worked out, because Matt had been to see us previously to ask whether we had any jobs available, because one of the guys he formerly worked with also works, Ant, who works in our assembly shop, was also ex-Leaping Cats. And as it turned out, I could then ring Matt and say, yeah, come and have a go and see how you get on, because yeah, the opportunity had arisen. So here he is, and cracking on with some panel work on the Jensen, and got all the joys of trying to get the panel straight on this. So yeah, onto the work side of things. He is carrying on from where he left off last week. He left off about here last week. So he's now moving on down this side of the car. He's come up that side at the front section. He's now working back down this side. And the first area of concern, it was the rear of the front wing, where there was too much curvature. It's been the problem with all the panels, basically. They're all replacement panels. It's almost all new metalwork, this car. And whilst the metal is nice and rust-free, the issue is that all of the panels have got curvature on the edges, where they've been tapped up to open gaps up or adjust gaps, which has caused them to bulge out, or where they've just had too much curvature from manufacturer, or from their creation, or in the case of the doors, we think where the skins have been spot welded, it's pulled the skin to meet the frame, which was slightly too small, and that's caused it to bulge around the edges. So there's been various work. Obviously Tom's done the reskinning of this door and got this pretty good, got this somewhere near the right shape, which was a bit of a battle, got that somewhere near, but the wing, with the bulging in that, we had to actually lose quite a lot of material there. So Matt has hot shrunk all the rear of this wing. He's hot shrunk. I think you spot weld shrank that, didn't you? Yeah. He's spot weld shrunk all using the little spot welder, one-sided spot weld gun. Spot weld shrunk all that area to lose some material there. It was quite a lot. It needed quite a bit taken out, and then to get that right, he's then leaded all that area, which is quite challenging actually. Big flat areas like that are really actually quite difficult to do the lead work on. They're quite a challenge. And he's done a really nice job of that. He's got all that right, and then he's working on the gaps, and he's had a bit of fun trying to set the gap on this door, because he was aiming for a sort of a 4mm gap, and we've realised you just can't get that gap on these, because the door, with the radius that the door operates on and the centre of rotation of the door, means that it just can't rotate on that radius and clear the back of the front wing. He's taken some material out of the back of the wing shut and got the door exactly right, but basically you have to have a 5mm gap for that door to actually clear the wing. So that's just how it is. There's no real choice there. He's now working on the leading edge of the quarter, which needs quite a bit of lead in it to get the gap right at the top. The gap opens right up at the top. I think that's just, I don't know if that's just a Jensen thing or just the panels on this car thing, but both sides are the same. The gap opens right up, and there's quite a, we were going through photographs because there's a meeting point of various trims at this point here. and it's going through, they're all different and they're all not very good in that area. From what we can see on photos, there's not really a definitive guide to how that area should look, other than there's some big lumps of rubber and trim in there which kind of cover everything up. So we've been trying to deduce exactly how that bit should be. The door gap though is pretty obvious what that needs to be and to get right, so the lead work's continuing to get the door gap right and blend that into the quarter. And also there was a section of the quarter panel just below the swage line where the shape wasn't right at all there, and because that's been welded, we can't really pull that to get that right. I say it wasn't right at all, we're not talking huge amounts, but it was wrong in that area. So Matt's been putting some lead into that area just to get that right, and that's coming along nicely. He's getting to the point of filing all that lot now, and getting that all tidied up, and then cutting the gap in and getting everything looking right. So yeah, that's all looking good. I'll move away so Matt can carry on. Stu's mainly been working on the rear end. His gas struts have turned up for the tailgate. We've got them on. They're a bit too powerful, so we've got to review that and adjust that, and we've got too much pressure on those, so they need to be less pressure. So we're going to have to get another set and rewire. See, all best intentions, we measured the force needed, and we've still gone way too much pressure on those, so we're going to have to adjust that. On the rear subframe, Stu's been working on that and we finally managed to source, well, basically I think previously I'd mentioned about trying to source some bushes for that and having a bit of a problem in getting the bushes, getting a set of bushes that fitted a reasonably stock size of tube, so I didn't have to machine the housings completely from scratch, that were long enough to have enough support for the loads that were going to be imparted on them, and that were thick enough to have enough compliance to absorb enough vibration and give us enough reduction in noise, vibration and harshness for the rear subframe in that car, which doesn't have a huge amount of compliance in the wishbone bushes, and we can't really add that compliance without losing the control of the wheels. In the end, I found a bush which actually I've used previously, which was available from a company in North Wales who trade as Polybush, but that bush was out of current production. I think it's actually a commercial vehicle bushing of some sort, something to do with a Mercedes. I don't know, Mercedes commercial vehicle, I don't exactly know what. They just term it a Mercedes 6 Series, I don't really know what it is, but they didn't have any in stock. However, speaking to them, they're very helpful. They've always been a helpful company, helpful again this time. Some years since I bought anything from them, rang them up, asked if they could do that, make that bushing for me because they had no stock. They said yes, and then I said, if it's being made, could it be made in a different shore hardness? Yes, it can. Can it be made in a different colour? Yes, it can. And can it be made to order? Yes, they can. Minimum order 20 bushes, not a problem. We're going to need, the car's going to need 8. It's going to make sense to have a spare set for the customer, so we need 16 anyway. The minimum order is 20. We're not too far adrift on that. Cost was pretty reasonable. So yes, I have a set of bushes and a number of spare bushes now coming to do the rear subframe mountings on this in 65 shore, which is the sort of shore hardness I want, and the bushes are just exactly right to package into the space. So big side story there, but what that has enabled us to do is last week James actually machined a set of dummy bushes in aluminium, just little top hats in aluminium, to do the locating equivalent to the final bushes, because obviously we can't weld near the final bushes because they'll melt. So we've got the aluminium top hats that James has machined. Stu's then made the mount tubes to take those dummy bushes, cut out the original tubes from the main crossbeam that mounts that cross member, and then welded in the new tubes. In order to do that, he's made up a steel slug, tack welded it into the tubes, used a hole saw equivalent of the same diameter, 51mm, 2-inch, the same size as the new tube being welded in. You use that to cut out the old tube, so it keeps the fish mouth, if you like, exactly concentric to the original tube, so no measurement accuracy is lost. And then take that slug out, tack weld it into the other side, do the same to the other side, that's all cut out, clean it all up, weld the bush tubes in, put the aluminium dummy bushes back in, and that lot is now mounted into the car. Yes, I've missed a key stage here. Doing all of that meant that we had to widen. I think I'd mentioned it before, trying to keep the width the same so we could get it into the same mounting slot on the car. We gave up on that. I simply could not get bushes that did the job in the space. So we've actually widened the pockets in the car. So we did a little quick drawing on CAD, drew up some plates, plasma cut them out of 5mm plate, which is ridiculously thick, but all the rear chassis sections on this car are cut from 5mm steel. But inner and outer are both 5mm. Pardon me, massively overkill, but getting the job done. So we've cut the pockets out, we've marked datum lines on for axle centre line and for height. So basically we've got a record of where those sections were. We've then cut them out, Stu's then cut them out, air sawed those out, made the new flat steel sections to go in, and then welded those in. That leads me to a slight aside, which I'm going to do now. I had a couple of questions on a couple of pages that I'm on Facebook, and I've seen on one of our videos as well, and I can't remember if I've said this before, possibly have. But talking of the air saw, a lot of people ask what tools we use for various things, and one of the questions that comes up pretty regularly is what air saws do you use, because most of them are all based on the same Chinese made and not very good air saw. It makes loads of noise but doesn't really do a lot of cutting. We don't use those. We all, I think, pretty much within the metalwork shop now, use a saw which is a British made saw, which cuts through 5mm, 2 layers of 5mm steel pretty readily, called a Sengar, which is C-E-N-G-A-R, Sengar JP901. And that is the air saw we use generally around this workshop. I see that question come up quite regularly. What air saws do you use, because they're all rubbish? Well, the Sengar JP901 is not rubbish. They're very powerful, very efficient, very good air saw, and they're made up in Halifax by Sengar, who are still going and still making saws. And if you ever need any parts, you just ring them up, and nice lady on the phone asks what you want, and you get supplied the parts. And very simple, easy to deal with, really good, not particularly cheap as you'd expect, but incredibly good saw. And that's what cut through the 5mm steel in the back of this, hence the tenuous link there. But I've been meaning to mention them for a while because we're so impressed with them. So yeah, that's what Stu's been working on there. I'm not actually quite sure what Stu's moved on to now. He's moved on to something on the front, so we'll deal with that next week, because I'm not quite sure what he's on with there. But we're going to resolve the gas struts, use some slightly lower pressure versions, and then Stu can carry on with the rear end once we can move the brakes around, and we need to get under the car to do any more work on that. We can't really get under the car while Matt's working on it, but that sums up where we're at on that. I'm going to walk this way actually. Behind Jamie is the E-Type. I'm not going to mention that because I think Cal is going to mention that very soon, because it's more linked into the CAD area. So we're going to quickly point in the direction of our blast room, because Sam is currently doing the TIG brazing on the Allegro in here. There's quite a lot of remaining sealer in the seams on this. And because of that, we've put it in the blast room so we can extract the fumes, because he's having to burn out bits of sealer from the seams on it, or quite a lot of sealer from the seams on it. And in order to do that, we put it in the blast room so we're not filling the place with fumes in the rest of the workshop. The extraction we've got for the weld fumes isn't really powerful enough to deal with all the sealer fumes that are coming out from the seams on that. So we're just running our throttle back a bit, our extraction in the blast room, so that we're pulling any fumes out that might otherwise be affecting everybody in the workshop. So that's why that's being done in here. But yeah, Sam's getting the TIG brazing done on that shell, and there's a fair bit of weld tidying to do underneath, and various bits and bobs of sorting out basically all the underside jobs that couldn't be done on the jig. Sam's getting through on that shell. Once that's done, then we'll be able to move on to the other shell and get that one done. And then there's also some rot repair work that we've got to do on both the shells, but that's why that's in there, and that's what Sam's up to at the moment. He's getting the TIG seam brazing done on the first shell. We'll swing by over here then, and Carl's actually in here at the moment. But yeah, there's various bits of dry build work being done on this Allegro now. And yeah, Carl's scarpered out of the area. You'll see him in a minute. But yeah, on to the first Allegro, which we're seeing second. Bobby's working on this, doing quite a few fiddly dry build jobs. The first one of which he's done a beautiful job of. He's just stepped in and removed the throttle bodies actually while we did a little brief cut in our uncut episode there, just because I'd made a muddle of things. He's removed the throttle body so we can actually see what he's been principally working on in the engine bay, which is the mock-up of the apace unit. He's done a rather nice bracket for that. He was making a mock-up bracket in some 16 gauge steel the other day, which was the last time I saw it. I've been buried away upstairs doing something else, and so I hadn't actually seen this finished bracket until a couple of minutes ago, and yeah, it's a really nice job. So yeah, he's done that, drawn that up in CAD, CNC cut that on the plasma from 3mm, then folded it all up, and that's in the engine bay now. And he was just explaining to me about the pipes. He's managed to do a slight adjustment of the original Honda power steering fluid return pipe. He's managed to rebend that so that we can actually just use a clip-on pipe for the return directly there, which is a really simple run. And then the high pressure feed line from the pump we've got to make up, but that's not a problem. We've got the fittings to do that. We'll make a high pressure line which follows the route of the low pressure line around the back of the subframe. While we're in that vicinity, he's made some little modifications and machined one of our Cytec fuel pump and fuel filter mounts to be the air conditioning dryer mount, which is, again, is a lovely job, as you'd expect, as he always does. So that's in there. That's a neat job. I know he's been working on evaluating what fittings will fit in the space we've got on both the condenser and the evaporator unit. The evaporator unit uses a slightly different type of fitting, and he's been working out what will fit in the space on both that and the condenser, and what the routing for those pipes is going to be. And we've got back into a debate we were having a while ago, which we're going to try and address again, which is being able to make up hard lines for AC fittings, and that's a thing we're going to revisit again, because we really want to be able to run hard lines for AC, and that's actually quite difficult to do in the sort of automotive aftermarket. Making hard lines for things like that is actually quite tricky, because nobody makes the heading tooling for any sort of form of cheap tool, or relatively cheap tool, that we could have in the workshop. I'm unaware if anybody knows of any sort of reasonably portable hydraulic tools for heading, putting the forms onto the end of air conditioning fittings where they're stepped at the end and have a rim headed onto the pipe to sit against the O-ring type fitting. I don't even know what they're called other than automotive AC fittings. If anybody knows of a tool that's reasonably portable, workshop based, that can do that, let us know. I don't know of any. So yeah, that's the next phase on that, which I've got to crack on with. Bobby's also been working on getting he's literally working on now, or will be when I'm out of his way, working on mounting the fuel pressure regulator to the bulkhead and getting the fuel line routing sorted, so that we've got room to get the fuel lines in down this side of the transmission tunnel, basically where they were originally mounted on the Honda, but on some new mounts that we're going to put in, because the original plastic carrier was obviously too long from the Honda, and they weren't in particularly great condition, so we're going to just make our own brackets to hold those lines. We wondered about using the Honda one, but we're not going to do that. So that's where that's at. And I think that's probably a good point to leave it, other than, I suppose, mentioning the fact that obviously things have moved around a little bit. Bobby's got this car on the lift so that he can do the fuel lines, and obviously the other one's through there, so all change in the workshop. We're still waiting for 2 more exciting projects to come in, as I mentioned last week. However, there have been various hiccups on the way, mainly revolving around transport. And I'm not going to go into all the hiccups, but basically neither of the cars have got here yet, despite their best endeavours. But they will be coming. They'll be coming quite soon, so on to that one soon. Moving on from that, we're going to go into the body shop, where it's actually quite quiet at the moment. There's Mark. I was going to say, Mark's around somewhere. He's just peeked out from behind Churchill. Mark's onto engine bay now, I believe. Yeah. Yeah, which is a big step forward. Actually, I didn't know that. See, I'm learning it all. This is how much I've been stuck in my office this week. Mark's just said the shell's ready for epoxy, so that's a pretty big milestone. If we're within the realms of the final, the high build that we get from the epoxy, then things are looking pretty good. And when these guys say it's ready for that, it's ready for that. This is a good point to be at. This is a really exciting point, because it's been quite a slog, as I've mentioned before, so that's a good stage to be at. And so Mark's then heading into engine bay prep. There's quite a bit of prep needed in there. There's been a lot of metal work in the engine bay, and there's a lot of fettling and fiddling and tidying then needed to make all that look super smooth and super perfect. It probably looks amazing on camera all the time, but actually when you get in there and start looking at the nitty-gritty of it, it's nowhere near as good as it might appear on camera. It is decent, it's a good job, I'm not saying it's a poor job, but it's just, on camera it all looks great. When you actually get into the nitty-gritty of these things, it's never quite so good. And to get everything absolutely perfect does take time, does take effort, does take a lot of sanding. There's not really any way around that. There's all these TV shows with these 5-day builds and things like that. Gloss over all that stuff. It's absolutely exactly. Well, and it's absolute rubbish, isn't it? The standards of build, when you actually look at these fast builds, are just not there. They're not very good. They're just all the details missed most of the time. Whereas getting the details right one of the almost the most important factor in that is time. You know, there's a lot of skill involved as well, but the most important factor is just time. There's no getting around the fact it takes time to get everything right. So that's onto engine bay next, and you know, realistically, I was talking to Mark beginning of this week. Was it beginning of this week? End of last week? And realistically, there's probably getting towards a week's work, I'd have thought, or around a week's work in the engine bay just to get it all exactly right and exactly how it needs to be, so that nobody can pick faults in it. So yeah, that's where we're at on that. No, this is it. Most of it's hidden by an engine, but we know it's not right, so we've got to make it right. The key is, you know, hours make all the difference. You've just got to put the time in. And I think obviously engine bay is substantially hidden by engine and peripherals and things, but if we know it's not right, even though you can't see it, we want to make it right. And I think I think it was Henry Ford that quoted something, I think it was Henry Ford, saying quality is doing it right when nobody's looking. And that's the point. It doesn't matter if you can't see it, it's still got to be right. It doesn't matter if it's hidden, it's still got to be right. So that's where we're at on that. And behind camera is Redux BMW M3, which is just about to have its panels attached. Gaz has just been doing the final prep on the carbon panels, the final prep on all the bond surfaces to get everything ready on there so that everything's prepared to the point where the panels can be bonded on. And then we need it not to be quite so cold. I think we'll probably actually be doing the bonding in the paint booth, unless the weather suddenly warms up, because certainly it's too cold to be using the adhesive at the moment. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, it needs to be done at around 20 degrees. I think it's 15 to 32 degrees the epoxy bonding agent needs to be applied at. So yeah, we're going to have to control temperature a little bit there, so we may end up doing that in the paint booth yet, unless things warm up. But yeah, Gaz has just been getting the final stages of prep done, ready for the bonding on this, and that's the next phase. The carbon panels will be attached. So moving on from there, we'll wander this way, and I think I mentioned last week that there was another bit of machinery incoming. And we're still not quite up and running with it, but I will mention it anyway. So we'll wander through here to the handover point for Cal, past a very noisy heater, and introduced to our new little area where we have our new bit of machinery. We're still not quite installed on it. I've been trying to juggle tasks a little bit, but we have our new to us, but second-hand, but 2020 machine, so not particularly old, CNC router, which is a Mantec Falcon with automatic tool changer, 9 kilowatts, 24,000 RPM spindle, and yeah, it's a CNC router. We have been thinking about getting one for a little while, because of various things. There are a few processes we've wanted to bring in-house. One is making small bits of composites and plastic forming tooling, so small mould tools for composites and vacuum forming tools for making interior parts. And another thing is directly making interior parts. We've been looking at making various sort of soft touch interior parts from a very high density polyethylene foam, which I think I've mentioned before, 100 kilo a cubic metre polyethylene foam. We've been talking to a foam supplier about that, and we've had some samples, and we're pretty happy with the feel of those samples, and I'm pretty confident they'll cut fairly well on a CNC router. Certainly that's how they are cut by other people. We've had some machine samples, but all of these things are adding up to quite a lot of subcontract work, and we do like to try and do things in-house where we can. And there are quite a few areas where we would be able to use a machine like this. The downside to this is we're all pretty green with this type of machine, so we've got a lot of learning to do. So the early phases of it are going to be, quite time-consuming and quite non-productive. However, once we've done that learning process, I think that we will find this machine pretty invaluable, and I imagine we will end up probably, if I'm talking here in a couple of years' time, talking about it in the same way that we talk about the CNC plasma cutter, where we went from it being a nice to have to it being used every single day of the week several times, and it's literally, we would really feel the impact of not having it. It feels like losing an arm if that's out of action now. And I suspect it'll be a similar situation with the CNC router once we've got to use it. But at the moment, I'm on a steep or vertical learning curve, and James, Jim, will be largely operating this, I think, is the plan, or as long as he still wants to after he's seen the various traumas of getting things up and running. But yeah, Jim, I think, will be driving this, and obviously it's going to be a very steep learning curve for him as well, because none of us have really had that much involvement with this type of machine before. The other the other assistance we have on that is Autodesk once again, in that we'll be working a little bit with Autodesk, and because we are going to be running this machine from the CAM facility of Fusion 360, and that's the big tie-in for us, in that at some point I want to switch over to running the CNC Plasma directly from Fusion 360 as well. It seems a bit silly using an intermediate program, good a program as it is, SheetCam. It seems a bit daft using an intermediate program when the Fusion 360 software can generate the G-code directly to run that, in the same way as it can generate the G-code directly to run this CNC router. So that's the way forward. We've got a few little bits to sort out. There's a couple of little gremlins to sort out on it, nothing too drastic. Finish off putting the extraction in. We've got some curtain doors to put up, finish cleaning up, get various safety bits and bobs organised, and one or two other things. We're getting a wall saw, a panel saw, for cutting up the materials to go onto this, because a lot of the time we're going to be wanting to make blocks of materials. So we'll be getting boards, cutting them up, laminated, bonding them together into a block, so then we can mill the block. And in order to make the blocks, we need to be able to cut the boards up reasonably accurately without taking loads of space. I haven't got space to run a table saw or a flat saw, so we're going to be using a vertical wall saw, and that should be, I'll be getting that next week, a second-hand wall saw. So we'll be getting that in place so that we can cut boards up. So there's a few bits, few boxes still to tick, but I'm trying to sort of manage this in the background whilst doing work as well. So it takes a little while. But yeah, I think on that note, and while we're conveniently in the assembly workshop, I will hand over to Cal. So see you in a week's time.
Round stone coffee. It's not possible. I thought I might be able to stay so still. It looked like the video had frozen. Oh dear. Simple things, please, simple minds. Oh, I can hear Nat's bellowing voice. Yeah. There he goes up the stairs. Right, okay. Got me round stone coffee. Follow me. Right, so first of all, you might notice that we made a little error last week in that Jamie hadn't noticed that he'd cut the end off, or the end of the video hadn't exported, and then we posted it, and it was only when we saw the torrent of comments coming in saying that the end of the video ended rather abruptly, we realised that he'd chopped the end off. And as per his comment that he posted when we reposted that video, he also chopped the end off his thumb the same night. So it seemed like it was just a chopping the end off things day. Anyway, we're back, and I'm going to go through what we've been on with. So, Mark on Escort, Project 1. Adam has been on. I'm going to actually pause one moment to point out that you probably hear us say Adam a lot, and there are two Adams here, to clarify. So this is Adam Gibbons over here, and this is Adam Manns, who's just walked over and sat down at the desk over there. So when it seems like Adam has been doing an awful lot, it's just because there are two of them. So Adam Gibbons has been on with the carpet in Project 1. So I think he was just starting. He'd done the Dyna liner sounded, and he was just starting cutting sections for the main carpet on that last week, and he's doing some of the boot sections now. So we've decided to keep the boot sort of functional looking to some degree. It's very easy to get carried away and make everything super kind of American hot rod panelled out, a bit like Kaiser's boot is, and I'm sure the Project Norman E-Type will go down a similar route. But with the Escorts, because they're a similar car, it seems more in keeping to keep it a little bit more pared back in terms of the level of panel work. So we're keeping it reasonably simple in the boot, we're going to carpet actually down the insides of the quarter panels themselves. There'll be a main boot carpet. Dean's just leathering the panel that sits on the back of the fuel tank. But you will be able to see things like the battery in there, the insides of the rear lamp units, the fuel filler hose coming through. We're making a feature of the rear damper reservoirs. If you've been watching for a long while, you probably saw us machining the mounts for those. So we've got some closing plates in the floor so you can pass the reservoirs through, bolt the plates in afterwards around the hose, and then they're going to mount in some anodised stanchions, which I think actually might be back today. So Tom, who was our new helper outerer, essentially picking up some of the work that Rich was doing before for us. He's out on an errand at the minute, dropping a huge batch of powder coat over to BG Penny, who they're our kind of go-to subcontract powder coater. So a lot of the components for the Project Churchill rear end are just going over to be powder coated now. He's also doing a run to Majestic Anodising in Birmingham, who are doing the bronze anodising work for Project One. So that includes those rear damper reservoir mounting pieces. So all coming together pretty well on that. Dean's going to be coming on Saturday, dropping off all the trim panels that he's made or upholstered more recently, and the console. So that, I think it's the centre console, front speaker grille surrounds, and the rear parcel shelf, bulkhead, floor panels, and fuel tank cover. And then he's going to be picking up the carpet sections that we've made so he can edge whip them. And he's going to be picking up the rear speaker grille surrounds and the rear parcel shelf section, which are the remaining pieces that need leathering. So yeah, that's going to start coming together pretty well. Project Kaiser, I mentioned last week, we had that back in because there was a bit of what we thought was a diff noise. However, having stripped the back end apart on it, some of which is now sat down there, we're not convinced it's that at all. There seems to have been some sort of problem with the rear wheel bearing. It looks as if potentially the preload wasn't right on it originally, and one of the bearings has spun. So we're going to be rebuilding the wheel bearing on that, and hopefully that was the source of the noise. So it certainly must have. It certainly isn't right. So I'd be 99% sure that's the source of the noise on that. So hopefully we'll get that back together, and that'll be that problem solved. Looking over this, I do love the front of that. Project Stravaig this is, which is a Scottish term. You'll have to Google what it means, but I just love that menacing front end on it, and I can't wait to get that final engine bay piece in there, which finishes off the engine bay. So Anthony's been carrying on with this. He's now made his new parcel shelf, so that's been made in 3mm ABS, and that will be leathered as well. We've got a pair of focal 6x9s going in there. Luke has finished his design for the kick panel, speaker, grille surrounds and grille inserts. He's just 3D printing those at the minute, so we'll be able to start modifying the kick panels shortly to take those grills. Anthony's been doing the amplifier mounting, so he's now mounted that Audison amplifier in the boot. I think the panel or brackets he's made to mount that have just gone off to be Xylan coated as well, along with another batch of stuff. And then we're sort of gearing up to look at doing the engine, the wiring harness, not the engine wiring harness, that's done, the chassis wiring harness for that. So Anthony's just been trial fitting all the switches in the dash so we can just suss out the layout of those. We're using the original switches. I think I'm going to get some reproduction bezels, or maybe machine our own bezels, but the bezels are a little bit tatty looking, so I'm going to get some new ones of those. But just working out the layout of everything so we can look at the wire lengths and where everything goes. He's also done the brake pedal switch on the subject of wiring, fitted that. And I've just sent off the model for the screen wash fill / clutch fluid reservoir, which there is a 3D print of it in place now. You can see it's got a billet top, which is actually the bare brakes top, same as the one on the brake fluid side, but the bit underneath it is the 3D printed mock-up we've just done just to trial fit that before it was machined, but now I've sent that off to be quoted for machining, so I think that's going to be Jonathan at PBE CNC who's going to make that for us. And I think, yeah, it's just sort of plugging away at it, getting everything together. I'm waiting on a big batch of stuff from Summit Racing at the minute, so things like the mouldings from around the front and rear windows, sill trims, the vents that go in the B posts, because we're ordering quite a lot of stuff from Summit on a fairly regular basis, but obviously because the shipping's a reasonable chunk, it makes sense for us to keep gathering batches together and then order it and then build up another batch and order it. So I've been gathering together a batch on that and so a few parts for other cars as well. But yeah, it's looking good. And then still on the subject of wiring, actually, Project Kuma. Steve's been pushing on with the remaining wiring on this, so he's already done the front loom legs on that. So there are two front legs that have bulkhead connectors behind the dash. One runs under the near side front wing, one runs under the offside front wing. So we've done the ones on Project 1. He's installing, I think he's actually done them on this now as well. So they go around, come underneath, go to the headlight, aircon pressure sensor, the horns on this side. Trying to think what else they go. Oh, the cooling fan, and they're on little Deutsch Auto Sport connectors on the bulkhead under the inner wing. So it's a fully sealed section of the loom, that. Whereas some of the interior loom we've done with like a fabric wrapping, because it doesn't need, it's overkill to make it fully sealed in there, especially as they're not a motorsport build. But obviously in that front leg area, it's open to the elements. It's got water spray and whatever spraying up from the wheel, so it does need to be a fully sealed loom down there. So it's Raychem DR25 heat shrink, Deutsch Auto Sport connectors on the bulkhead, fully sealed connectors everywhere else. So that's coming together well. And then I think the one remaining piece now is the engine harness for both cars, which I think they're literally just doing the layout for now. Obviously this car, we haven't got the engine yet. Sherwood's, I think got that on the dyno next week, so hopefully we'll have the engine for this one in a couple of weeks. But on that one now, we've got everything together to work out the positions of everything. We were waiting for the cam cover so we could exactly kind of route the wiring routing through there. Couple of things we needed to just finalise locations for as well. You saw us making the throttle motor bracket a few weeks back, so that's all in place now. I was just working out the position for the Motec lambda to CAN module. That's what takes the lambda signal from the lambda sensors, converts it to a CAN message stream that the Motec ECU can read. So we sorted out a location for that. So yeah, it's all systems go on designing the engine harness. And hopefully that will tie in really well with the engine for this one arriving and hopefully having the harnesses then ready to go on both of them. Interior for that one will go together pretty quickly. I'm just in the latter stages of confirming the colour choices on everything on the interior of this one, but it should tie in nicely with finishing the interior on Project 1 and being able to start the interior on Project Kuma. So that's all falling into place pretty well. And then probably won't go over what George is on. He's carrying on with Quattro stuff because it's such incremental changes. There's not much point dwelling on that at the minute. Luke has moved on with the E-Type to the door card design. So we're happy. We're 95% there with the whole dash layout, console piece. We've now plasma cut a sort of skeleton of cross sections and tacked them into the Project Norman body shell. And then Luke's kind of done a fairly rough and ready origami cardboard and tape skin over all of that. So we can sit in the car, get a proper feel for how everything's laid out, make sure we can reach the switches, make sure we can see the display screens. I'm happy with it all. So the next step there is going to be having the customer over so he can sit in the car and make sure he's happy with it all. But in the meantime, we're moving on to the door card design, which I think is coming together really well. I had a call with the customer yesterday. We were sort of definitely going in the right direction, but there were a few changes he wanted. So we've kind of constantly going through this sort of batting back and forth, getting ideas off him, trying some changes, showing him where we're at. And, you know, it's a bit of an injection of ideas from us both. But I think it's really coming together now. So quite a much more three-dimensional card than you'd normally have in an E-Type. The sills are really deep in an E-Type, so you can kind of bring out the bottom of the door card and form an armrest there, and it doesn't really intrude into the car any more than the sill already does. And then we're going to have an area where we're probably going to have a tweeter further forward in the door card. So yeah, it's taking shape quite nicely. That actually reminds me, thinking about the layout of the door card and the fact that we're going to have a button for electrically opening and closing the doors. There was a question last week from somebody saying, you know, is there going to be an emergency release of some sort? I think I'll look up the actual question, but yes, there will be a mechanical release as well. So our intention is will have door latches that have release motors within them, but there is still a cable release there as well. So you can either use the mechanical release handle and just open the door in the normal way, or you can press the button and it electrically releases the latch and electrically opens the door, but you can override it. You can basically force the door open. So if I just have a quick glance. There was a couple of questions I was going to do. So that was one from Driz Developments. Yeah, quick question regarding the electric doors. Is there a need to have a mechanical way of opening in the event of emergency? Well, yes, there will be, and it's not going to be hidden away. I think there was a bit of a hoo-ha I was reading about recently where, I think it's on a Tesla, where it's electrically open doors, and the emergency release is like hidden away behind something, which seemed a bit odd. So ours will just be, you'll have something akin to the original release handle to open them mechanically if you want to. And there was one other question I was going to mention, which was, do you use waterless coolants? So that was from Insane Billy. It's a great username. No, actually we don't. I can't sort of fully comment in a measured fashion because we've never used them. But what I can say is the reason I've perhaps not gravitated towards using them is, to me, there's a bit of a sort of almost a flaw in them, in that if most of the time when your car overheats, it's going to be when you're sat in traffic, so, you know, get on a baking hot day, really hot, and when it does so, blows the radiator cap, water everywhere, you immediately know that something's wrong. There's steam everywhere, water everywhere, and you go, oh shit, and turn the engine off. My concern that I've had with waterless coolants is, because they don't expand in the same fashion, they can get extremely hot. I mean, this is almost a selling point they make, the fact that they can get up to 130 degrees without boiling, which is all very well, but it always concerns me that if your engine's getting that hot, it's going to be susceptible to being damaged. But there won't be, unless you're watching the temperature gauge or have some kind of temperature warning light, it's entirely feasible you wouldn't notice that your car's overheating. So although I'd be interested to hear sort of comments from people on the positives of a waterless coolant. But for me, I mean, as long as the car's cooling system is up to scratch and capable of keeping the engine cool, I've never felt the need for anything other than a traditional coolant. So I'd be interested to hear people's opinions on that. Anyway, on that note, we shall pick up next week and see where we've got to then.